So without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce you to Anne-Marie Flynn. Anne-Marie Flynn is the president and founder of the Champion Foundational Change Agency, which is the gold standard in workplace excellence. A professional consultant, training, and educational expert in organizational and human performance, Anne-Marie has become a much sought after speaker with a spark for storytelling and a knack for normalizing fear and adversity. Champion Foundational Change Agency has served hundreds of individuals, nonprofits, and cutting edge businesses throughout North America, tailoring impactful workshops, professional development, and customized strategies to create a fulfilling relationship with profitable and productive value within the workplace. Anne-Marie's dream of expanding the potential of women and workplace well-being finally came to a reality when in 2018 she requested and accepted an early retirement from a 29-year career with the world's largest consumer packaged goods company. She knew that in order to live her life purpose, she needed to step outside of her comfort zone of a long and successful career and take the leap into the unknown of her own business. Her faith and her life purpose provided the backbone and assurance that she would be a success. Many credentials include Certified Workplace Wellness Ambassador, Professional Leadership Development and Coactive Coach, Certified Nutritional Coach, Certified Corporate Athlete Facilitator, Bachelor of Commerce graduate from Dalhousie University, and Vice President of a not-for-profit organization. Welcome, Anne-Marie. The mic is all yours.
Wow. Well, thank you. Gosh, who are you talking about? Well, she sounds pretty cool. Yeah, so thank you all, everybody, for joining today. And my subject today is trauma and mental well-being. And when I started putting this together, first of all, thank you to Spark Conference for inviting me to do this talk. I have a real passion for doing talks like this. And I really, as I was going through all the content that I had, I was going back and forth for weeks trying to figure out what to put into this talk, what to leave out. And knowing that I only had 30 minutes, I just had so much content that I wanted to share with you all. I just didn't want to miss anything because I find the topics of wellness and well-being is so extremely important, especially now. So I hope that the information that I do have to share with you today, that you do find useful and informative. And my hope is that if anything, if you can only take one nugget away from the stuff that I'm going to talk about today, that it does have an impact on your world and those around you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off by asking you all a question in the poll. And the question is basically, how are you feeling? I'm just going to give you 30 seconds. So you can answer tired, stressed, burned out, discouraged, distracted, depressed. Just want to know, just kind of get a temperature gauge of how everybody's feeling right now. So just throw in your answers there. There's no right or wrong. So as we can see, we've got about 40% of the people saying tired, 20% stressed, 40% burned out. So yeah, this sounds pretty darn typical of what's happening not only here within Halifax or the Atlantic, but also nationwide and internationally wide as well. Here's what this is the comparisons in terms of what has been showing up in recent survey. So we can see that the answers that you guys have identified are pretty clear that you're in line with what is happening here, not only in Atlantic, but also internationally as well. So if you take a look at this, what I can tell you is that what you're feeling is that the pandemic is having a dramatic impact on mental health. And there's so many people that are feeling exactly the way you're feeling right now. In fact, what employees are saying, that they feel more than half the time people are feeling tired and stressed and burned out. What's interesting is that over the summertime, there was a lot of people that were feeling a reprieve because they were able to get out. The cases were low. People had the ability to get outside. They had the chance to interact more with others, to travel within the bubble, etc., etc. And this really helped with keeping our mental health steadier. And now we're back into the fall. We're now going back into a second wave, and people are starting to say, oh my God, like, not again. And now that we are in the fall, we're indoors a lot more. It's getting darker earlier. Kids are back at school and cases are starting to creep up again. This is really testing just how our mental health is coping during these trying times. And what people are saying is that this second wave of COVID is really a mental health wave. Now, Russell did a great job in introducing me, and thank you for that. But before we go any further, I just want to, again, reintroduce myself, kind of give you what the typical introduction is that I use. I'm president and founder of Champion Change Agency for as long as I can remember. I've been fascinated and passionate about human performance, resilience, and mindset. And in my business, we support the whole health and well-being of our clients. We nurture all things that make a complete human, which in turn creates a healthier and happier and higher performing human and organization. So this is my typical introduction. Now, in order to be truly authentic though, I also want to share with you the other dimensions of me as well. And it may help you to understand why I'm so passionate about today's talk. So from the outside, what the world sees, especially, like I said, Russell did a great job in introducing me. It's like, wow, who is this person? Because it appears that I've had or continue to have a really successful, and I'll put in quotation marks, privileged life. At age 21, I became Atlantic Canada's very first female military scuba diver. I had a 29-year career with one of the world's best companies. I have a really awesome family. I'm also a pro athlete, and at age 54, I'm ranked 7th in the world in my sport. And I'm also a president of my own company. And over and above all that, I've got all these credentials and certifications. I could put a ton of letters at the end of my name. So if I was to see someone like this, I would probably say, this person really has their you-know-what put together. Well, that's just one dimension of me. That's just what the world may see right now. But I also want to show you the other dimensions of me as well. For years and years, I made up the story that there was something wrong with me. This is me when I was probably around 6 or 7 years old. And even at that, when I take a look at that little girl's face, I see a look of loss and fear. I had a lot of hidden wounds where up until recently, I felt that I was the only one that had all of these experiences. Many of them went undiagnosed for up until like maybe the last 5 years or so. And when there are hidden wounds, or what we call the silent scream, no one sees it, no one hears it, and no one feels it. But the person that's having these experiences sure as hell does. And they're not going to talk about it because, like me, chances are they feel like they're the only ones that are going through it. And there's a lot of shame around that. And because there is a belief that everyone else is fine and I'm the only one in the world who has feelings of being unworthy or unlovable, there's no way I'm going to be talking about it up until now. So I don't know if any of those adversities or experiences may relate to you guys as well, but have you ever been so upset or stressed out and about the feeling of, and you feel like you're almost like you're losing your mind? If there was ever a part of the economy that has undergone major stress, major change and instability, it's women and service providers. And you may have heard of the term, the she session versus the recession. That's exactly what this industry or this pandemic is causing, a she session. And as admins, you're all service providers to the businesses that you work for. And many of you are balancing the stress of work, working from home, homeschooling maybe, family stressors, financial stress, and the list goes on. And I can only imagine that this has brought up a whole lot of discomfort, maybe even fear and anxiety, stress, and maybe even trauma. Many of us aren't even realizing that what we are experiencing in the last 9 months can actually create trauma with some people. So I want to talk to you about what is trauma and what is stress. So if we take a look at stress, just the definition of stress, it's the body's reaction to any change that requires an adjustment or response. The body reacts to these changes with physical, mental, and emotional responses. In other words, stress is anything that life brings its way that has the potential to upset our equilibrium. Now, trauma, on the other hand, is anything that overwhelms our existing resources and ability to cope over an extended period of time. What's interesting here is that traumatic experiences are always stressful, but stressful experiences are not always traumatic. Now, in a few minutes, I'm going to expand a little bit more on examples of trauma so you can get a better understanding of just how vast and prevalent trauma really is. But let's just keep going back to talk a little bit more about stress. So with stress, there's good stress and there's bad stress. And then there's that sweet spot where actually stress can be healthy to have some, and it's actually healthy to have some level of stress in our lives. So too little stress can keep you from reaching your potential, while too much stress can harm your health. So when your stress is too low, you can feel lethargic, bored, unfocused, maybe even directionless and without a sense of purpose. But when you start to move towards your sweet spot, you can start to feel energized, you can start to explore the edges of your comfort zone, you balance that stress with rest and recovery, and then you hit your sweet spot, that aha moment, the eureka moment. And there's typically a growing phase where you just learn, you grow, you get stronger mentally, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. And this is like the Goldilocks spot where it's not too much stress and it's not too little stress, it's just right. Now, without some form of rest and recovery from that sweet spot stress, then the stress starts to get a little bit on the high side. And then you start to feel anxious or obsessive or panicked, or you're flailing, stuck or numb. And those stress hormones start to go out of whack, and there's typically not enough time for rest and recovery. And if you keep going in that direction, eventually your system will start to crash and burn. So what we noticed is that 40% of you are saying that you're in a crash and burn, or you're in feeling like you're burnt out. So you might actually be in that too high of a stress zone. Now, in recent years, psychologists have been using the phrase adverse life experience. And it's a term that helps us to distinguish between the ordinary stressors of life from the stressors that can become traumatic for some people. And if there's a prolonged adverse life experience, then this can lead to trauma. So when we experience stress of any type, the body enters what they call an alarm phase. And in a normal situation, we eventually recover and get back to our baseline, or maybe even come away feeling stronger and more resilient. So like I said, with the proper level of stress, with the proper level of rest and recovery, it's actually a good thing for us. It actually will help us grow. For example, some people might perform better under a little bit of stress at school or at work if they're given like a rapidly approaching deadline. But if we're experiencing trauma, but with trauma, we experience that stressor so intensely that we're unable to go through all of the steps we need to recover. And some of us actually end up getting worse off than where we were when we started. So the bottom line is that stress is not always harmful, while trauma nearly always is. The trauma is way more prevalent than data indicates. But here's what we do know. About 60% of men and about 50% of women have experienced at least one significant traumatic event in their life. Women are more likely to experience sexual assault and child abuse, while men are more likely to experience physical assault, combat, accidents, and disasters. There are several types of trauma with varying degrees of severity, but they can all have a huge effect on our health and well-being and our ability to care for ourselves and for others. So when we talk about trauma, most people associate that word with big events like sexual assault, living or serving in a war zone, physical violence, or even being like in a car crash. And psychologists refer those as big T trauma because such experiences are extremely damaging, obviously, and objectively terrible. So usually people know that they've experienced this type of trauma. However, in other times, traumatic events may actually seem like no big deal on the outside, but they still leave a strong and lasting impression, and that's the type of stuff that I want to talk about now. So there's something called small t trauma, and that refers to the more prevalent indignities, insecurities, injuries, and what I call like the small paper cuts of life. It could be something deeply unfair or angering that happens over and over, like systemic racism, homophobia, workplace bullying, or for kids these days in this generation, cyberbullying. So small t trauma can have a really long lasting effect too. And many people experience it without ever recognizing it as trauma. So for example, people from marginalized groups are way more likely to experience this type of trauma. And we can also experience trauma as a group as well. And that's what they call collective trauma. And this is a psychological effect that destabilizes the foundation of a society or group. For example, a global pandemic. It's creating a collective stress worldwide. And this type of trauma can last for generations in our collective memories, and the meaning we find in these memories often goes on to shape our society moving forward. And then we have what we call intergenerational trauma. Now, this is the type of trauma that can get passed down through families in many, many ways. There was research done on the descendants of Holocaust survivors, which has actually shown that there's been changes to the genes in both parents and children because of the severe trauma that the generation that experienced the Holocaust went through. And as a result of that, it actually has changed the DNA makeup of their descendants. So let's talk a little bit about the brain. Now, the reason you get a brain is to simply not figure out what pajama bottoms you're going to wear to your next Zoom meeting, which I showed Russell and Mata that I've got my pajama bottoms on, but I wore my best pajama bottoms today. Now, I know some of you are wearing them, so it's totally okay. So yes, so the reason why you have a brain is simply not to figure that out. Your brain is much more primal than that, although that's pretty primal. Your brain is made to help you survive. Everyone here has probably heard of the primitive brain, or people call the lizard brain. And then there's the rational brain, or people call the executive brain. Well, the primitive brain, first of all, is way bigger than our executive brain, and has been in existence way longer than our relatively new executive or rational brain. And it's this primitive brain that takes over to help you get through and survive potentially life-threatening situations. So the primitive brain is also in charge of what scientists often refer to as the 4 Fs: feeding, fighting, fleeing, and reproduction. I'm not about to say the 4th F. All the brain does is that it takes all the information through our senses and determines if the situation is green light, everything's okay, keep going along. Yellow light, well, that's tolerable stress. And it's actually good for us and helps out build our immune system and our resilience. And then there's red light. Well, that's the intolerable stress, where our brain goes into fight, flight, freeze, and it pushes all those stress hormones into our system. And those stress hormones that are released, they're not going to our brain to help us think about what pajama bottoms we're going to wear, but it goes to our extremities so we can fight or flee. And in the cave person days, when you're running from a saber-toothed tiger, you're not going to be thinking about your pajama bottoms that you're going to be wearing. You just want to run faster than the slowest person to get the heck out of there. So there's a reason for that primitive brain and for how it responds to stress. Now, in today's world, when if we're in a constant state of fear or stress, and when our brain is constantly thinking that it needs to run from that proverbial saber-toothed tiger, our body becomes really hypersensitive and easily triggered. And it's kind of like when that happens is that it creates an imprint into our brain. And we go towards simply surviving, and our higher needs are just not a priority. And that imprint is what scientists call PTSD. So many of us have heard the word PTSD. I can't see everybody, so I'll just raise my hand that I've heard of it. But if anybody hasn't, let me just give you what the definition is. So the definition, by definition, PTSD is considered an anxiety disorder that develops in reaction to physical injury or severe mental and emotional distress. And as you saw earlier in my presentation, there are countless ways in which you can get traumatized. And if that trauma gets imprinted in your brain, then that develops PTSD. Now, this is where I'm going to go a little bit off script here, because I want to change the language of what has been coined a disorder. Because PTSD, from a neurological standpoint, is not a disorder. It's actually a reordering or rewiring of your neurological or sensory pathways so that you can survive in a really dangerous or perceived dangerous situation. And as I mentioned, the brain doesn't distinguish the difference between what's real and what's perceived danger. All it knows is that it feels danger, and it's going to start rewiring that brain to help the body feel safe. That's its job. And it's in this reordering or rewiring of the brain pathways that causes the person to think or act differently. So for individuals with unhealed emotional trauma or sustained stress, what seems like a mild or ordinary stressor in everyday life may bring about an avalanche of emotions and functional impairment because their coping resources are already maxed out, dealing with those invisible emotional wounds of trauma. And trauma, like I said, is being imprinted with a memory. So for example, someone might see this picture of a sailboat, and it's a nice sunny day and it feels really calming to a lot of people. Or someone else may see the sailboat heading towards the rocks with precarious waves around, and it's triggering them. And they're starting to feel anxious because they had a near-death experience in the water, or knew someone who drowned. So what's interesting is how two people can see the exact same situation, and based on their past experiences and mindset, may have two very different emotional reactions to it. So people with trauma or sustained stress can also struggle with physical issues as well. Think hormonal problems, elevated inflammation, unexplained pain like fibromyalgia, shortness of breath, which can cause pain. And what I didn't post up here is peripheral vision also narrows when we're in a state of trauma or high levels of stress. And again, it's all for a very good reason, because for vision, it means your visual attention could be focused on one small geographic area of an emergency scene or one task being performed at a scene, and you miss everything else in your periphery. And again, if you're running from that saber-toothed tiger, it's a very beneficial thing. And in the modern world, it's important as well when you're looking at, things like you're looking for safety to flee or to fight back. And the other thing, trauma or sustained levels of stress can also have can also make changes to our health habits as well. So let's just take a look at food as an example. So people with a traumatic history or sustained level of stress may overeat and or binge. And for them, it's like losing themselves in a binge can actually shut down the world for a while. So it can actually be a nurturing technique. They can compensate after they feel like they've overeaten. They may purge or over-exercise or fast. And what's interesting is that the endorphins released in the punishing workout or from binging or purging may actually provide a temporary high. They might control or restrict their eating. In fact, they may alternate between this if they feel like they're losing control. Or they may come up with really strict rules and with harsh consequences, like I must work out for 2 hours a day or else I'm a lazy, you know what. And they may do things that what may seem confusing or contradictory, like going on a diet in the morning and binge eating in the evening. Or the other thing is that they may just check out or get brain fog around food. So I've heard examples like, I have no idea what happened. I just sort of woke up and the bag of chips was empty. Many victims of sexual trauma will actually gain weight so that they appear unattractive to the gender that's harmed them. So the more intense the trauma in the person's life and or the more frequent it's been, the more likely they are to have physical symptoms and or maladaptive behaviors, thoughts, and beliefs. So as you can see, trauma and sustained levels of stress is way more complex than we may have thought. And this is why I believe it's so important to bring this awareness to groups like you guys, and education in the workplace. So if there's any of you that feel that this is an important topic to bring into your workplace, please let me know, because this is the type of talk that is becoming a more and more important topic to bring into the workplace. Now, I've covered off a lot of pretty heavy stuff here, and it may feel to some of you that there is no way out of the conditions around trauma and PTSD. However, if trauma and PTSD is acknowledged, it can also change us for the better. There's something called post-traumatic growth. And post-traumatic growth is when we change and evolve in good and healthy ways as a result of trauma. And it often involves finding meaning in our pain. So for instance, we may vow to help others in similar situations. And that's for myself, which is why I'm really passionate about presenting this to you today. So how do we create a more compassionate environment for ourselves and for others? And what are some small yet impactful ways to cope with trauma and sustained level of stress? Well, number one, first thing is to familiarize yourselves with the signs of trauma, which hopefully the information that I've provided you in the brief time that I have gives you a taste of at least what is there. And knowing what trauma and stress looks like can help you to support those around you and also be more forgiving of yourself. It can help avoid feeling frustrated when a behavior doesn't seem to make any sense. And it also can help to know when it's time to look for help and or to refer out to a mental health practitioner. So what I want to do now is walk you through some ways that can help you to create compassion for others and for yourself. So first things first. First, affirm the validity of someone's feelings, including your own feelings. So I'm going to give you some things that we may have all said and some more helpful things that potentially we can say. So instead of saying something like, it's no big deal, well, the reality is it is a big deal for the person that's going through it. Instead of saying, I understand completely, the reality is you don't. And many trauma survivors don't even completely understand what they're going through. A lot of them don't even have a language for what it is that they're feeling. They just know that they're not feeling right. So to say that you understand completely is probably an understatement. The other thing, especially if you're feeling frustrated, the worst thing you can say is get over it. They can't, not without help. And the other thing is don't avoid the topic and say nothing because it's too icky or you just don't know what to say. It can be uncomfortable and it might be hard to know what to say. The best thing you can do is just sit there and listen. I'm sorry for what you're going through. Thank you for trusting me with this. I'm here to listen and support you. You're not there to rescue them. You're just there to listen. And a lot of the workshops I do in organizations and in groups, I help them to shift the conversation so that they can feel safer. It does feel safer for people to have these type of conversations. So that's another thing that I do a lot with organizations is how do we shift the conversation and create a safe container so we can have conversations around this. The other thing is how do you shift your internal dialogue so you can start to have some more positive self-talk and learn the art of what I call perfect imperfection. Okay, kind of like wearing a dress top and pajama bottoms, that's perfect imperfection. So just know that all of us are broken in some way. So if you hear yourself saying yes, but, if you think of that, the word but is more of a stop word, knowing that we all have some level of adversity, instead of saying yes, but, how do we shift the conversation to say yes and? Yeah, I have this adversity and how am I going to move forward with it? If you're talking with other people or even with yourself, especially with other people, one of the things that you don't want to do, you don't need to rescue them. Okay. So instead of saying, I'll do this, I'll do it for you, cheer them on and just say, I know you can do it. That's what they need. They want to help them equip themselves and empower themselves so they can start to move forward. If you're feeling like you just want to say, I am, if you identify, like at the beginning of my talk, like I can say that I am an athlete, I am a founder of my own company, I am this. Yeah, that's all true. And I'm so much more. So if you can shift the conversation, maybe you're saying, I am this negative thought, or I am that negative thought, or whatever. You know what? You have an adversity and you're so much more. There are so many more dimensions to you. So how do we also bring that out? Okay. We are more than one dimension, and we all have strengths and we all have adversities. That's what makes us human. If you hear yourself saying, I'm a failure, or that was a failure, how do we shift that thought process to say, what's here to learn? We've all failed in life. It's normal. It's a part of the process. And quite frankly, it's actually healthy. The mindset here is, how do we see failure? What if we were to see failure as simply feedback? What if we were to accept the fact that we are not perfect? In fact, we're perfectly imperfect. And when we see the world from this perspective, what does it give us permission to do? And what does it give us permission to be? And how do we see others that are just like us, perfectly imperfect? So when you know, the other thing is, when you know you're about to go into a stressful situation, a lot of us pretty much know what our stresses are. How do we be proactive before going into that stressful situation? Well, I always say, pick a thing before the thing. And here's what I mean. Pick an action or a thing that you'll always do before you engage in a stressful situation, which is the other thing. Ideally, it can be multiple actions, like a menu of choices for yourself. And I call this a self-care or a nourishment menu, because we're so deprived of so many things that nourish us in so many different levels right now. So for example, it doesn't have to be rocket science or anything complicated. It could be before you go into a stressful situation, like before I went into this conversation, I always get stressed up before I do a talk. I always have a little ritual that I do, and I'll talk to you a little bit about that in a second, before going into talks to sort of ground myself. It could be something as simple like take 3 deep breaths. Drink a big glass of water, play with your pet for 5 minutes, do some quick stretches, listen to a favorite song for a few minutes of a podcast, or just even go for a short walk. So now here's a little bit of work that I'm going to get you guys to do. It's over to you now. So in the chat box, what I want you to do is just really quickly, I don't want you to think too much about it. Just throw out some ideas on some of the things that you can do to add to your own self-care menu. And to give you a little hint, think about what you can do in 5 minutes or less. Whatever you immediately think of, write it in the chat box. And the good news is nobody gets to be wrong here. And the most effective nourishment menus include actions that line up with your goals and values. So example, if you deeply value a close friendship, maybe calling a friend to do, you know, could be one of the things on your self-care and nourishment menu options. So just in the chat box, just write down some quick thoughts. 3 things I'm grateful for today. Ask myself, what did I learn today? Make a list. Music, wow, talk to my kids, message a friend, take a walk, stretch. I'm going to be writing this down. Evening tea, oh yeah. Who is my superstar today? Yep. Make a coffee, yeah, of course. Excellent. Yeah, what great ideas. I don't know if I missed any. Listen to a comedy routine or a favorite song, that's a great stress reliever. Listen to 3 gratitude journal. Give myself a compliment. Yep. Yeah. Excellent. Go for a walk. Yeah. Kiss my cat or dog. Love it. Yeah. Unconditional love from an animal. Yeah. I just feel grateful just listening, reading all of that. Is there a way I can kind of keep those notes anywhere, Russell? Because if there is, I want to add those to my list. Here's some other examples that might be of help for you too. If I can get this, there we go. Here's some other examples. A lot of you guys have already talked about it. Walking outside, low-key music, massage, deep breathing, laughing, snuggling with a loved one. Maybe something that you can add, maybe instead of 5 minutes, you can add to 15 minutes or 30 minutes, or if you have an hour or two. There's some other things, yoga, swimming, having sex, mindfulness, meditation, green tea. There's so many things. And again, it doesn't have to be complicated. So here's something that I do that I wanted to share with you, and I'm hoping that you find it helpful as well. So there's a grounding exercise that's been used with, in fact, I actually got this from when I was going through my own, I call it spiritual awakening versus my breakdown, that my therapist helped me with from a grounding standpoint that I still use to this day. And it's called the 5-4-3-2-1 method. And this exercise aims to remove your anxious thoughts and helps you focus on the present moment. So I want us all just to try it. It's not complicated. I'll walk you through it. Okay, so let's just try it. So just get yourself comfortable. And all I want you to do right now is to take a look and look for 5 things that you can see and say them out loud to yourself. And the reason why I ask you to say them out loud, you don't need to say it to me, but just say it out loud quietly. It kind of helps get all your senses in the groove. So just say out loud, for example, I see a computer, I see a cup, I see the picture frame. So just for yourself, just say it out loud. So just take a look around and see 5 things in your area. Okay, now the next one is feel. So pay attention to your body and think of 4 things that you can feel. And again, say those out loud to yourself. For example, you could say, I feel my feet in my socks. I feel the hair on the back of my neck. I feel how soft my pajama bottoms are. So think of feel 4 things and just say those to yourself. And when you're done that, we're going to go to listen for 3 sounds. And it could be the sound of traffic outside, the sound of typing, or the sound of your tummy rumbling because it is lunchtime. So think of those 4 things and say those out loud, or hear those 4 things and say them out loud. Now, if you can't hear anything, then think of 3 favorite things that you like to hear. And then from there, we're going to go say 2 things that you can smell. If you can't smell anything at the moment, or you can't move around, then name 2 of your favorite smells. So mine is lavender and this really cool perfume that I spray on first thing in the morning. And the last one is taste. Say one thing that you can taste. Maybe it's the toothpaste from just brushing your teeth, or the coffee that you just had, or the green tea that you were sipping, or the mint that you had, or the gum that you're chewing. And if you can't taste anything, then just say what your favorite thing is to taste. Now, this exercise is a great tool to help you relax and get present, and it can be done anywhere. And it helps with being alert, of mindful of any behavior or feelings that you may be having at the time as well. So just with a raise of hands, did anybody find that they were able to kind of get more present? I'm going to raise my hand because I felt a little bit more present with you all just by doing that. Now, I went through it kind of slow, but as you go through this and practice it, you can do it within a minute or whatever. So you can add that to your nourishment menu. And there's also things like meditation and getting outside. And again, those are ways that will help you to get present as well. Now, when it comes to creating your self-care menu, it's not about finding complicated actions or activities that you know deep down inside that are just not sustainable. And my father always used this term with me, the KISS method. Now, he called it keep it simple, stupid. I'm not going to say that. I kind of prefer this other terminology, keep it simple and keep it sustainable. So keep your actions small, keep it something that you know that you can do, and keep it simple. Now, there's no getting around it. This is all heavy stuff, and you may yourself have experienced trauma and or high levels of sustained stress. And a lot of people in all levels of society choose not to talk about this stuff due to stigma, still around stigma around mental health. And I'm really hoping to break that cycle and break that trend. And it's been proven that when people start actually talking about their adversities, like I'm doing with you today, it gives everyone around them permission to open up about their own adversities as well. Now, difficult subject matters can be really draining, so make sure that you also charge your own battery and make sure that you put your oxygen mask on first, because your health is just as important. So make sure that you look for help, ask for help, get support when needed. Get coaching like myself, look for someone like myself that can help you with building resilience if you're feeling stuck. Get counseling if you're feeling helpless. Know your limits and honor them. Start to create healthy boundaries for yourself. Learn to unplug, get away from social media and your phone. No one is going to be devastated if you don't answer the text right away. And also practice self-compassion. Now, one of the things that I'm going to do too is that if this looks like help, and I've done this in other talks, is that I'm giving away this Goals to Action adventure book. I hate to call it a workbook. It's an adventure book. And anybody that's interested, and if you want to help get work on helping you with getting, starting with goal setting, especially with the new year coming around, I'd be more than happy to send this to you. So it kind of gives you a step-by-step to help you take little actions to achieve any specific goal. So if anyone is interested, my email is showing here. Please don't hesitate to drop me an email, and I'll be more than happy to send this to you. Okay, so my email is shown there, and also my website is shown there as well. And on my website, I've got lots of different programs that I work with organizations with, and I also work with individuals. So what I've got highlighted at the bottom are more individual coaching. If you're looking for foundational coaching around resilience or your health and wellness, to embrace your inner champion, and so on, I'd be more than happy to do a complimentary chat with you. And if you're looking for more resources, I also highly recommend this individual who works with a lot of trauma patients or people with a highly sustained stress environment. Donna McLean, there's her email, her phone number. You can look her up on the website as well, on her website. So I'm really hoping that you do take advantage of using her as a resource as well. She's a wonderful, wonderful lady. So I've given you a ton of information. I've got some more resources here that I'll talk about, but I also want to be mindful of the time. I probably went over as usual, but I do want to pause here now and hope that if anybody has any questions, that they can ask questions. And hopefully there was at least one nugget that you can take with you moving forward.
Thank you so much, Anne Marie.